Wireless mic here you can use. It will amplify the room, but also for the benefit of our Zoom attendees.
Yes. Wonderful. I'm glad you told me that.
You can hold that one.
Waiting for the last person to get Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to the 2026 Emeritus Society Legacy of Excellence Presentation and Honor Award. And this award's given to a emeritus faculty of merit, as you can imagine, each year. It's one of the missions of the Society and one of the great things we do. And today we have a really good person to present, as always. So we have people on Zoom, and we'll acknowledge them when we come to questions, and I'll let you handle that, Bob. Just a quick point about Bob. I understand all his talks are electrifying. I'm right about that?
I thought they were shocking.
There you go. They're high voltage for whatever it's worth. Just one little sidebar too. I helped Bob put his package together, his nomination package together, and when I told him that this year I thought the competition was going to be particularly acute, we had probably a record number of applicants. Bob said very humbly, just being nominated is an honor. So with that, I will introduce the introducer. Charlie, please come forward.
Thank you, Larry. It's my pleasure to get to introduce Dr. Robert Olsen today. He received his BS degree in electrical engineering from Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey in 1968, and the MS and PhD degrees in electrical engineering from the University of Colorado in Boulder in 1970 and 1974. He's been a member of the electrical engineering faculty at Washington State University since 1973 and holds the rank of emeritus professor. Well, I guess that's a good rank, huh? During his tenure at WSU, he's been an NSF faculty fellow at the GTE Laboratories in Waltham, Massachusetts, a visiting science at the ABB Corporate Research in Vassars, Sweden, and at the Electrical Power Research Institute in Palo Alto, California, and a visiting professor at the Technical University in Denmark. So he's been around a little bit. His research interests span all aspects of electromagnetics issues in power transmission. His work in these areas has resulted in approximately 100 publications in refereed journals and approximately 150 conference publications and presentations. He is also one of the authors of the book, AC Transmission Line Reference Book, 200 kilovolts and above, which is published by the Electrical Power Research Institute, and the author of the recently published 2-volume book, High Voltage Overhead Transmission Line Electromagnetics. He is a fellow in the IEEE, an honorary life member of the IEEE Electromagnetic Compatibility Society, and has served as chair of the IEEE Power Engineering Society, AC Fields, and Corona Effects working groups. In addition, he is a past associate editor of the IEEE publication Transactions on Electromagnetic Capability and Radio Service. So it's my pleasure to introduce Bob Olsen.
I don't need that.
Can you hear me all right? I think this is live. Is that right? You can? Good. Okay. Excellent. So let's move to, you'll notice that the title on this thing is says Prologue, Gratifying Career, and Continuing Epilogue. I did this because, well, number one, I want to know a little bit about my background. What got me here? How did that happen? And then that's the prologue, Gratifying Career, because it was gratifying. And I'll talk a little bit about all different sort of aspects of it, the research, the teaching, the service as well. And then I say not just epilogue, but continuing epilogue because, well, I guess I'll say it this way. When I was introduced, said this is an emeritus award. You know, you're supposed to be retired, but there's some people that fail retirement, and I think that's me because I can't really stop doing all of this stuff that I'm doing. And so it is a continuing epilogue. It's continuing and even beyond today, I think. Well, one of the things I'll just mention here is that this cartoon says, I'm Norwegian, all right? Just Olsen is a very common name, Norwegian name, and I'll be saying more about that in the next slide here. And that is, if you look here at this sweatshirt, I used to have one like this, in fact, exactly this one, and it says, Mick Olsen's Lutefisk Burkers, one soul, right? Now, if you know anything about lutefisk and the Norwegian, it is something you don't really want to eat. There are some people that say that they like it, but there's not that many people like that. So, and when I did open this, of course, it was, I sold one of them and then went out of business for obvious reasons. But things like I won the Norwegian lottery, 1 million lutefisk, 55 a day for 50 years. You know, when you think about it, no, it's not really the greatest thing you want. But what I like about them is that we take ourselves not very seriously. And so we tell jokes about ourselves, we tell about ourselves. And I think that's actually a very positive thing. I'll just mention one other thing that I'm going to say here. Somebody a few years ago gave me what's called the Norwegian calculator. And here's what it looks like, all right? You can kind of see that. If you want to calculate, add 2 and 2, you have 2 here, 2 more here, and you get 4. It tells you that you have 4. Not only that, but it has a memory here. It's a string in the thing. So we tell jokes on ourselves, and I like that. But the only thing I'm going to say here is this thing has, it says Olsen with an O, and you have to know that that's not right. It really should be an E, otherwise I'd be Swedish, and that would be a bad mistake. All right? So I was born in Brooklyn, New York, as I said, as a son of Norwegian immigrants. Now, this is not just about me. And so I wanted to be very careful to say that I had a gratifying career, but there are a lot of people that helped me along the way. And along the way, you're going to see a number of these people as I talk about the different parts of what I've said. In fact, I noticed just today, I'll mention this guy here, and I want to say hi to him specifically, but he's in Manhattan. He was my PhD advisor at the University of Colorado and has remained a good friend for many, many years. So David, hello to you. I'll say a little bit more about you in the future. He's a very, very wonderful thesis advisor. So this is me. I was born in Brooklyn, but I didn't last very long there. I ended up staying in New Jersey. There are several different places along here where I lived in New Jersey. This is my family. I'm the one over here that is sucking my thumb, et cetera, et cetera. That was just one of the characteristics I had when I was a kid. My father, my mother. But I want to point out that my father was also a professor of civil engineering at the City University of New York. And it was known as poor man's Harvard in that day. And that was actually a very interesting thing and something that kind of stuck with me for a long time. And that was many, many people came into New York City as immigrants. Immigrants have been a very important part of this country. And I saw these people come to CCNY, which in those days had no tuition. It was free. So basically, they lived somewhere in the city. They took the subway up. They got their education. They worked very hard. And you saw the result of that. And I met a number of these people, and it was very inspiring to have that. So this will come back, and you'll see some more about this as time goes on. One of my passions as a kid was baseball. You can see me here in my baseball uniform, one of these. I wasn't really that very good, but what I was, however, was a fan. And I was a fan of the Brooklyn Dodgers. The Brooklyn Dodgers were everything to me. I lived and died by what the Brooklyn Dodgers did that particular day. And I, in fact, even attended several games at Ebbets Field back when it used to be. And by the way, if you want to experience Ebbets Field, if you go to Cooperstown sometime to the Baseball Hall of Fame, there is actually a seat from Ebbets Field there, and I've actually gone there and sat in it. It made me feel really good. But the Brooklyn Dodgers, as you may know, left Brooklyn in 1957 when I was 11 years old. And if you're younger than 11, you don't know what's going on, right? So it doesn't matter that much. If you're older than 11, you know it's all about money, and so it doesn't matter that much. But when you're 11 and it's your team, it's something that's very, very difficult to handle. So in my opinion, there are three great villains in the 20th century, Hitler, Stalin, and Walter O'Malley, who took my Dodgers away, right, in 1957. All right, so I knew I wanted to be in electrical engineering very early in life. One day, my teacher in kindergarten said, "Today we're going to make fans." And I was ecstatic because here's what I thought she meant. This was a fan in my house. We had one just like that. I thought we were going to learn about motors and fans and how they worked and whatever. I wanted to know how this worked. And so the time came and I was very, very excited. And she said, "Get out a piece of paper and fold the paper and fold it again and fold it again." And I'm saying, what's going on? Can't be. This is what we made. We made fans that you go like this, right? So I was devastated, just absolutely devastated. It just hurt me. Well, I continued this. These were the times when in 1950s, late 1950s, things like the International Geophysical Year, some of you may remember that, was happening. It was the time of Sputnik, for example, and interest in science was unbelievable. It's just the level. And so I got very involved in science, and here's a picture of me I was actually won the science fair in my high school when I was in 9th grade. Not on anything electrical, by the way, that's another story. But also got involved in amateur radio, and you can see what we call my shack here, which is basically wherever you operated from your transmitter receiver, you did that. That was called your shack, and that was me in my shack. Well, also during high school, another part of me was that I ran cross country, was a runner. Many is not that great, but my team was cross country state champions. Not because of me, because only the top 7 runners ran in that state race. I remember going there and cheering them on, but it wasn't me. However, I do want to point out, and one of the reasons I brought this up here is that it turns out that Ron Middlehammer, who many of you know, basically came out of a high school in Bergen County, which is the same county I was from, but his was one of my rival schools, right? You're not supposed to like these people. We beat them, right? You can see that. We beat them that year because we beat everybody that year, right? And so that was right. And the other interesting about it is that this group of people here, this group of guys really stuck together over the years. We continue to do that. And a few years ago, we had a reunion in Connecticut. And this was the group of people that were left. This is the coach here. He was not that much older than us. And you can recognize this guy back here in a crimson shirt, I think, actually at that particular time. But that was a good part of my upbringing. Well, I continued the interest in science, and I ended up going to Rutgers University. On the left side here, if you recognize this cartoon, it means you're old, right? Because it hasn't been around for a long time. This was Mr. Magoo. How many remember Mr. Magoo? Yeah, that's right. Well, Mr. Magoo apparently went to college, and he went to Rutgers, and so he was always known as a Rutgers man. But as you know, he really couldn't see very well. But in any case, if you know about that cartoon, you know that you remember you're old, basically. All right. So at Rutgers, I majored in electrical engineering, which is not surprising because I was a ham radio operator. That's kind of the thing you'd expect. Very interested in electrical things. And I actually was able to take three semesters of electromagnetic theory. One was an elective kind of thing, and got very, very interested in it, but I knew I needed to know more about this. And so that's something that eventually led me on to graduate school because I was just fascinated with this and fascinated with how things worked. All right, now I'm going to take a little bit of an aside here growth in life at Rutgers, while I was there, somebody challenged me to read the Bible. And I said, okay, I'll do that. I hadn't done it before. I mean, I knew about it, but I had never read through the thing. So I just said, okay, I'll do that. And so it was interesting. I kind of read through it, a lot of history, a lot of wisdom, but I kind of plowed through it pretty quickly. And but when I got to this little tiny book there called Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament, I saw something that kind of made me stop in my tracks. It says, I have seen everything that's done under the sun. Behold, all is vanity and striving after wind. But I think it's typical for college students to have this sort of existential experience. What's going on? Is my life meaningful? Is there any purpose to this thing? It's kind of what's going on here? And I needed to know if life was meaningful, had a purpose, or maybe it was just like Macbeth's statement, where he said, it's a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. I needed to resolve that. Well, I also recognized, in my opinion, that science wasn't going to answer this. There were too many questions of morality, free will, existence, consciousness, a variety of things that are really beyond what can be handled with science. And so it kind of was the beginning of a lifelong journey for me. But near the end of Ecclesiastes is the statement, my son, beware of anything beyond these. Making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. Well, true, okay, we've all done that. We've been there, and you just get tired of studying, tired of all these books. But how do I recognize that, reconcile that with this career that I'm looking into? Well, it ends with the end of the matter, fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. And my journey is kind of based on that statement, but it also helped me understand that many books and much study can actually be part of a life. We'll go through the details on that, but I really like this woodcut from Albrecht Dürer. It's called St. Ambrose in His Study, where he's very much at peace with his scholarship and whatever, and that's the way kind of my career worked out like that. Well, while I was at Rutgers, this was a time of great turmoil when I was there, and you all remembered if you've been there, 1968, 64 to 68 was time when Vietnam was going on. It was a great deal of turmoil. I won't go through all the details on it, but I ended up starting going into ROTC, and one of the things that happened when I graduated was that I was offered what was everybody else was offered, a delay from active duty, which means that I could go to graduate school without worrying about the draft, that sort of thing. And so I chose to do that. And later on, that turned out to be actually for me at least, not for other people, but for me, it was actually ended up being a good thing. Well, went to the University of Colorado. Up here is David Chang, and if you noticed on the board before, David is actually listening to this. He's there, and so hi, David. He was brand new from Harvard when he came to the University of Colorado, had been trained by one of the best people in electromagnetics there, incredible person. He had a great deal of time for me because he was new at Colorado and a great influence on my professional life. But included in my committee were some other major people, Jim Waite, Leonard Lewin, Herb Kromer, and I'll just say more about a couple of these things. I tried to get educated at Colorado, and I ended up doing things that maybe weren't directly involved in what I was doing, but I was fortunate to study quantum mechanics with Herb Kromer. Naval later was at the University of California in Santa Barbara and got a Nobel Prize, and actually remembered me, which was kind of interesting. But also, there was a summer course with George Uhlenbeck, who had been in the 1930s in physics, and was the identifier of electron spin. And so I said, well, I got to take a course from this guy because here he is, and it's my only chance ever to do that. But frankly, I don't remember a whole lot from them because I haven't used quantum mechanics. I haven't used quantum statistical mechanics since that time. But I was also there, and another interesting thing that happened in the beginning was that fiber optics was just beginning to come in. And there were some advances. And Peter Claricodes from the UK came one summer, and I remember studying with him as well. Just some very interesting experiences at Colorado. Well, what did I do for my thesis? Well, I had a problem that had to do with wires over the earth, on how they interact and what happens with them. But the interesting thing is that I spent about 1.5 to 2 years banging my head on the wall because I wasn't getting anywhere. I knew that it wasn't working. I knew things were not working out well, but I couldn't figure out why. And you just try things, and you try things, and you try things. You get suggestions and whatever. And finally, it came that what the problem was that nobody had known that there was another, what we call mode of propagation, that nobody had ever seen before. And so I was the first one to ever have seen this mode of propagation there. And once I used that, once I understood it, it made my problem work. Everything worked beautifully and wonderfully from that point on. And I'll give David quite a bit of thanks for helping me with that as well, and for supporting me, because there were times I wanted to quit. And if you know what that feels like, you know what it feels like. Well, this was published in something called Electronics Letters in 1974. And that was, but I also want to say that I think one of the things that happened to me when I did this, worked on this, was that when you enter graduate school, you're not really sure you can solve problems that haven't been solved before. When you get out, you should be able to do that, right? And I think this was a time when I began to realize that, oh yes, it was possible. I'd had enough education, I could do this. I could solve problems that couldn't have been solved before. All right, so that was something that was a big change in my life, was to understand or come to that belief. Well, finally, my 4 years was up. I told you earlier I'd asked for a delay from active duty. My 4 years was up, and it was 1972 at that point. I was an officer in the Signal Corps and hadn't been in the Army for 4 years, so I knew almost nothing about the Army. I'd forgotten everything I'd learned. And so I went to Fort Gordon, Georgia, which is where they do what they call the Signal Officer Basic Course. And the first day they had a meeting of 102 lieutenants there, and they called my name, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, why are they calling my name? You know, I'm just sort of in the middle of here. It turns out I was literally the most senior officer there, and the military way they do things is if you're most senior, you get to be the leader, right? That's it. That was really not a smart move, frankly. I was a very dubious choice for that, for a variety of reasons, but I learned a lot. And I learned a lot very quickly about how to handle things, how to handle people, how to respond to the different situations that I had. But also, can I say as well, I told you about the turmoil back in 1968. It was a very, very tough time. It was tough for me as well. But by 1972, it was essentially over. And I got a letter from the military, the Army, that said, and not in these words that I'm going to use, it said, well, you know, we really don't need you. So would you prefer serving for 3 months instead of your 2-year commitment? And I thought about it for about a microsecond, or maybe it was a nanosecond. I said, yeah, I'll do that, okay? And so I did this. I was the leader of the class of lieutenants, but when I got out, that was the only thing I had to do. And I was very fortunate for that decision that I made some time ago. But I also want to point out that there were a number of people that were not fortunate at that time, and I want to remember them as well. Well, was I destined to come to WSU? I have a couple of slides here. The evidence for this is really thin, all right? It's really not there, but I thought it was interesting enough to talk about. My father was a professor of civil engineering at the City University of New York. So he would go and do summer programs, and he did one in Seattle in the summer of 1957. And this is my father. You can see him on the slide here. But there's somebody else here by the name of Don Bender, who was at WSU at the time. Now, there are two Don Benders. It's one that was here recently, and you may remember him. This is one who was here earlier in the same department, whatever. And I'm sure that sometime during that summer, my father went up to Don and said, look, I've got this 11-year-old kid who wants to be an engineer. Do you have a position for him, right? Well, unlikely, but maybe, all right? So that's one thing. Another one was this. After my father passed on, I was looking at his diploma, his degree from MIT from 1935. And one of the things I noticed was that, and it was signed by Carl Compton. Carl Compton. And that name may seem familiar to you because of a building just over here, Wilson Compton. His brother, turns out, was president of WSU. So there's a connection here, right? Okay, maybe that's why I was destined. But I just want to point out that if you haven't heard this story, there were actually three brothers together. There was Carl Compton, president of MIT. There was Wilson Compton, president here. And then Arthur Compton, who was the inventor, well, the discoverer of the Compton effect, was at the University of Chicago and got a Nobel Prize. How would you like to have three kids like that? I mean, that was just kind of amazing, right? That was the case. So it was an interesting story there. Was I destined? I don't know, but the evidence is kind of thin. But there were these things. Well, I heard about this position. Positions were hard to come by back at that time. It was a very difficult time. Up here, they called this the Boeing years. But I heard about this possible position, and I said, where's Pullman? So I looked on the map, and since I had been in 1957 in the state, in Seattle, I looked near Seattle, figuring I was going to find Pullman. So that's where I looked, right, on the map. And then I said, well, I can't find it, so maybe I'll have to do something different. And in those days, what you did was to use the gazetteer, and you looked up the name of the city, right, the old way of doing things, and I saw J16. Oh, there's an over there. I didn't know there was an over there. I really didn't know that. And so I went to this J16 quadrant, and by and large, there was something there. Okay. That was my introduction to Pullman, right there, right? Well, recruitment by WSU. WSU was in bad financial state. Has that ever changed? Is there anybody here that can say we had a year when everything was good, the budget looked great, and we weren't taking budget cuts? Is anybody? Raise your hand if you remember. I don't remember that at all. But it was really bad then. But not only that, it was worse than here, worse than now, because Glenn Hauer, who was the chair of the department, a wonderful mentor who passed on last year, and many of you knew him, and he was a fantastic person. He said, look, I don't have any money to bring you up to WSU. So I have a meeting back at the National Science Foundation in Washington. I'm coming through Denver. Can I meet you at Stapleton Airport, right? And that was my interview, right? That was my interview. But I didn't want to come without ever seen the place. I didn't know what it was like. Here I am originally from Brooklyn, from New Jersey, and Pullman is in the middle of nowhere. So I actually paid for my own trip. And for those of you who are relatively new on the faculty, I just want to let you know this is what used to happen. Well, at least for me anyway. So this is where Glenn Hauer met me at Stapleton International Airport there. And that's where my trip started to come to Pullman. So I started here, this big airport, lots of planes and whatever. And I ended up where? Here, Pullman Regional, all right? Now, I went to the airport to get this because I couldn't find before this a picture of the old terminal. Now, those of you who come in now realize we actually have a very nice terminal here in Pullman, all right? But in those days, there was this thing, and many people called it the shed, all right, because it kind of looked like a shed. And this picture, I think, was taken the only time there were ever two commercial airplanes at the airport at the same time. And you remember this small one, some people called it the yard dart plane because it looked like the kind of thing you throw in the yard, all right? Something like that. But I also want to actually come up with this thing, but given TSA now, this is what TSA was like in 1973. You literally walked out of this building here, here's the plane, and there was a fence here, and you opened the door and you walked on the plane. That was kind of what it was in those days. It's a little bit different now than what it was then. So I ended up here in Pullman Regional. I met Marcia at church the first year I was here, and now we have 3 kids. One of them's here. By the way, Marcia's not here because I have to tell you this story, that my daughter lives in St. Paul, Minnesota, has a 9-month-old, and needed to go to a conference. And so she called my Marcia, and she said, well, would you consider coming and being a nanny to your granddaughter here for a couple of days while I go to this conference. And she thought about it and thought about it a nanosecond, I think. Maybe it was a picosecond, and said, yeah, I'm going to go. She's going to miss today, but she'll be here on Friday for the dinner and the celebration. But we have 7 grandkids, 3 of them here in Pullman. And at the time of this picture, there were only 6, but now there's 7. And that's Lily that Marcia is with right now. So she'll be back tomorrow. Okay. When I first got here professionally, there was something it's very important to talk about that had just simply started that year, 1973, was the beginning of what's called the Power Professorship Program. And it was the time when there were several faculty member, Betts, Flexig, Zalbia, Baker, and they had raised money to support a new faculty member, Mosier in this case. And I'll say more about this in a moment. Those contexts, when I first got here, I was educated in electromagnetics, but there were a lot of problems in power industry that were related to electromagnetics. And I started getting into these because this is where they had contacts, and they helped me make contacts in industry, whatever. But shortly after it started, and this is within a couple of years, this individual by the name of Ed Schweitzer came to study here at WSU. And he came here, in fact, I had an email with him just the other day. He said, I came here because of this power professorship program. That's why I came here. Well, as you all know, we have benefited tremendously from this. We now have Schweitzer Laboratories in town. This new building is going to come online in the fall called the Schweitzer Engineering Hall. And there are a variety of other things in the community as well. Many of you know that the Aquatics Center here is something that was actually purchased by Ed Schweitzer twice. Purchased it once, gave it to the school district, they couldn't handle it, purchased it again. He's done a lot of things for the community, but because of this program. Well, this program morphed into what is now known as the Engineering Energy Systems Innovation Center. And I want to point out that Anjan's in the back here, and you need to go hear his talk at 3 o'clock. He's going to talk at 3 o'clock today, the distinguished address. But this, because we had that enabled us to recruit Anjan as chair at first and later as dean. I'll say more about that, but he's been advisor to the Secretary of Energy. And both Ed and Anjan now are members of the National Academy. This is how one little thing, one little program that you get started at one point can have some tremendous consequences. But we also now have the Advanced Grid Institute with the Pacific Northwest National Laboratories. But as I'm going to say, this really gave me a jump start in my career because I had all of these contacts here for me. They helped me get going. Another way that people helped me in the program as I got started. So I'm going to talk a little bit about research, and I'm not going to just simply describe all the research I've done, but I want to talk about 3 different kind of ways that it happens. Some of them are a little bit odd, and some of them a little bit different, but hopefully you'll see what I'm trying to give you a flavor for. That science doesn't always work as they tell you in 6th grade. It sometimes works in different ways. Well, this is Vern Chartier on the left. I don't know if Vern's watching us. He has the URL. He lives in Portland now, long retired, but he was at Bonneville Power Administration. I had a small contract with them at the beginning. The first contract I ever got, $16,000, by the way. Just let you know how small it was in those days. And so I went over there to report on what I had done. And so I went the night before because my meeting was in the morning. And that night there was an ice storm in Portland. And because of that ice storm, a lot of people couldn't get in. They couldn't get in their cars. It was slippery and whatever. But Vern did. So I went up where I was supposed to meet somebody. Vern was there. We ended up talking and said, he said, with your background, maybe you could help me resolve a controversy that I have with several European scientists about the nature of electromagnetic interference from power lines, from high voltage power lines. And he said, do you think you could help with this? I said, well, I think so. I didn't know for sure, but I thought I could. And so he was very helpful in getting me some funding from BPA, and then later on with the Electric Power Research Institute, where, that turned out to be a very important part of the work that I've done, but it led to my election as a IEEE fellow. So I like to say that because of an ice storm, I'm an IEEE fellow. Right? I'm sure that's all in there. But this was published in the AGU journal, Radio Science, a number of other publications related to this in different places. But that's one example of how you never know what's going to get you started in a certain area. You never know what's going to help you get going in that area. So where do ideas come from sometimes? This is Monty Pullman, who was actually an alum of WSU. He is, in fact, he's watching today. Hi, Monty. Monty lives over in Vancouver, is retired from BPA. And we were discussing some work that we were doing on optical fiber and power lines. This was the time when they were starting to put optical fiber on power lines. BPA was doing it a certain way, other places doing it differently. Monty was leading their efforts. If you ever go see these big high voltage lines and you see some wires, you don't know what they are. Could be fiber optics, it could be him that did it, all right? So we were discussing this, and I looked at his results. I said, they're wrong. They're not right, Monty. That just doesn't look right to me. It's not, I just don't believe it. And so we started looking at his program. Everything looked right, but I still didn't like him. I didn't like it. And so you have this dissonance, and dissonance is often what brings ideas forward, all right? And so I stewed about this for weeks, and finally, probably in the shower one morning, I said, oh, that's it. It had to do with, and I don't want to get into technical details, but it had to do with the fact that there's this thing we use called space potential. And space potential not only has an amplitude, but it has something called a phase. It's important. But because of that, all of a sudden, ideas came out for how you could build sensors in a way that's much more sensitive than sensors could have been built before. And so this is an example right here of an experiment that we did over west of Moscow, or I should east of Moscow, on the Troy Highway. And if you go over there, you will see a whole line of poles there, and you'll see two of them that have anchors that go from the pole down to the ground. And you might wonder why that's there. Well, it's because of this experiment that we did, that Avista funded. And so it led to some very interesting things in terms of designing sensors that were more sensitive. All right. Now, sometimes, this is the last one I want to talk about research. Sometimes research is done just for the beauty of the result. This is a problem I always wondered about. I was curious about it. What happens when you have a power line and you have a ground wire up there that's for lightning, but it's grounded at every tower? At high frequencies, what happens? Well, most time we didn't care because power lines are at low frequencies, but there are some reasons why it might be the case. And I said, you know, I wonder if I could find a way of solving that problem. And I did. And it was interesting because what happens, this is the traditional theory here. This is a little resonance that happens, and I was able to identify that. I had no funding for it. I had no care about whether anybody was going to fund it. But it was beautiful. There's something beautiful about this. You probably look at this thing and you see, oh, that's just a little bit of trigonometry and a little bit of algebra. And I look at it, I see a thing of beauty because there's something contained in it that helps me understand something. And that was, that's the third thing I wanted to talk about. All right, having said that, I'm not going to talk about this much. My graduate students went to a variety of different places, research labs, industry, some to university positions, not so many of them, further studies as well. I had appointments outside of WSU, and as I mentioned before, optical fiber communication is something I got into. I was interested, it was beginning, and so I spent 7 months back in Waltham, Massachusetts as an NSF fellow. I also spent a year on sabbatical with ABB Corporate Labs in Västerås, Sweden. This is the one that's more fun. This is Rich Lorden, who invited me to come down to the Electric Power Research Institute in Palo Alto. And the first day I was sitting there, he comes into my office and he says, your job here is to find interesting problems and solve them. Is there anyone who's an academic here who wouldn't like to hear those words? Yeah. I mean, wasn't that cool? And so that's really what I did that year. I just found interesting problems and solved them, right? All right. Everybody's supposed to get 15 minutes of fame, right? That's what Andy Warhol said. And so mine came when Derek Muller who does Veritasium on YouTube, contacted me and he said, could you help me? He had found my book that I had written. He says, could you help me do this video on why energy doesn't flow in wires? Everybody believes that. I'm not going to go through the details. Go look at this thing if you want to. This was actually controversial because he ended up doing a second one because he didn't get it all right the first time. And the second one was much better, by the way. But I have a cameo appearance. It now has 27 million views. So that's my 15 minutes of fame, all right? All right. I taught broadly. I'm not going to go through the list of these things, but these days, when you come here and they say, just teach 1 or 2 courses because you can do a good job at them and they're in your area, you're in this narrow area, just do that. I ended up teaching about 20 different courses. And I'm not sure I would recommend that anymore. I wouldn't, probably. But I think I can say that every time I taught a new course, I always learned something that kind of came into my research as well. And so it was actually interesting for me to do this. Okay, now teaching. What do my students think of me? These are some cartoons. The first one there is on the far side. It says, he actually gave me this, one of my students gave me this cartoon, and he had blotted out the far side and added of EE351, which was one of the courses I developed here. And he said, Dr. Olsen, may I be excused? My brain is full, right? Another one here that they gave me is, congratulations, Bob, torturer of the month, all right? And then a graduate student gave me this one, and it said, here, this is from Shu, here, Dr. Olsen, take a look at this thesis and tell me what you like. And it's snip, 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 and it ends up as, I like this word very much, right? All right, so I think the fact that they were willing to do this for me was actually said that they maybe thought me as difficult, but respected me. I hope that was the case. Well, I'm the only one, I think, that's ever had this happen to you, to myself. This was in the Evergreen in 1987. I was teaching a course, undergraduate course, and as background, I had taught mostly graduate students before this, right? And I went back to an undergraduate course, and I don't think I calibrated my exams correctly. So Sean here happened to be an electrical engineering major and an English major, both, which was actually a very interesting combination. And he wrote this about the experience of taking my test, and he said, as soon as I read the first problem, I knew I had no idea how to do it. But I said I didn't become alarmed because that's only 25%. I went to the second one, same thing happened. And as I was starting, then he said, maybe I'm a complete idiot. Maybe I don't belong in college. Maybe if I leave right now, maybe I can make Ellensburg by midnight, nightfall. Well, but then he says, well, I started somewhat relieved when I listened to the sounds of the class and everybody else was doing the same thing in the class. And I said, there may still be hope. And I will tell you that, first of all, Sean asked my permission before writing this, which I thought was kind of classy of him to do that. And then also, he passed the class, right? I will tell you that. In 2003, Anjan Bose, who's back there, asked me to be the interim associate dean of the college for undergraduate programs and student services. I was especially naive about what was being done there, but I accepted. Really didn't know what I was getting into. But one of the things I'll just mention here, before I'll mention some other things, we worked very closely with this UW. Let's see, was that Wyoming or Wisconsin? That's that one that's downtown Seattle. I can't remember its name, but I think it's that one, yeah. We worked very closely with them, and we actually had quite a number of NSF education grants, and we actually grew the student population by about a factor of 2, which was actually pretty cool in those days. But is Char here? Char was going to come. Maybe she's just watching online. I hope she is. Char was one of the people on my staff as associate dean. Absolutely incredible. I will literally say that she taught me how to be associate dean because she knew everything that happened in that office. Anjan can verify this. Absolutely taught me everything I knew about that. But I also knew that she had a very special place for underrepresented students in her heart. She was very close to them, got to know them really well, did incredible things with them. I mean, just her life just poured out for these people. And I found out about this award that you could get through the National Science Foundation for mentoring underrepresented students. And I tell you, I had more fun writing this proposal than any proposal I've ever written before. And I called it Miss Grimes' Opus, because there was a movie out at that time called Mr. Something's Opus. I remember what his name was right now. And I remember going into my office one time and saying, Char, come on in. I want to look at my NSF site, see what the status of this award is, to see if it's been granted or not yet. And I noticed something on the site that indicated to me that this was going to be granted. And I said, Char, I think you're going to the White House. And as you can see, she did. And that's true. So she was fantastic, got her due for all the things that she had done over the years. Well, also got involved in entrepreneurship, although I will tell you, as I've told Ray here before, it's up here, that I spelled it wrong when I first learned about it. And so I really didn't know anything much about it. But Ray is who here, right here now, and Gaiman Schultz were people who are very important. Harold Frank here, who had a company down in Santa Barbara, funded this thing. Among other things, at one point we had an alum who was on the original Tesla board of directors, and she said, you got to come visit Tesla. This is the next big thing that's happening. And so we did, and guess who happened to be in the audience, in the office, and he gave us a full half hour to talk to the students, Elon Musk. One of the teams, we had teams, was the national finalist in Collegiate Inventors Competition. It was a really exciting kind of thing that we did with students. This is also another thing that happened during those times was the team mentoring program. I was really concerned about trying to get people into engineering who didn't traditionally think about being in engineering. And so many of them are underrepresented. And so this is, we formed this team mentoring program to basically encourage them to stay. We could get them in, but we wanted them to stay. And that program I did with Manuel Acevedo of the Multicultural Center. And a few years later, this is after I was not involved, it got the same award that Char got a few years before. We also started engineering programs in Bremerton and Everett. That's Larry James. Larry, I don't think is here, but he's still in town. Hope he's watching online. I was asked to consider starting an engineering program in Bremerton. And I didn't really know if we could do it, but I talked to the dean at that time, it was Candace Claiborne, and said, do you think we could do this? Well, we started to look into it. But what happened was that we got enthusiastic support from Larry James and the provost's office. I couldn't have done it without, knew about financing these things and whatever, everything we did with Larry's help. But because we got one going in Olympia, something happened about 2 years later. You may remember Elson Floyd, who was our president for a while, until he unfortunately passed on. And I was requested to meet with him, fortunately not for breakfast. If you know anything about Elson, you never wanted to get invited for breakfast because it meant you were going to get fired. All right, so it wasn't breakfast. But he asked me to come in because he was trying to get Everett as a branch campus. And in that branch campus, he said in order to get it, he had to establish an engineering program, and he wanted me to do it. Could you do that? Well, with Elson, you didn't say anything except, yes, sir, yes, we will. But because of the Bremerton thing, we were able to do it. Both of these programs still going on. Okay, another one, the power company practicum that we do over spring break. Just last week, we sent 60 students out to different companies all over the state. Instead of sending them to Mazatlan and being on the beach like most college students do, these go out and get some practical experience and learn some things there. And it's the only one in the United States. And in fact, last week I was on the road visiting students in the different places where they were. It's a really fantastic program. All right, now since retirement, and I've got just 5 minutes left here. I'm going to try to do this quickly, but I flunked retirement. I did have a PhD student. I want to say more about him in a little bit. Did some consulting, some work with SEL in terms of electromagnetics. I still do work with the university with this practicum and professional science masters, and I do class lectures there once in a while when I'm asked. But I served for 6 years on the planning commission. But you know, you might say, well, don't you do anything fun? Well, yes, we do. We do go on cruises, and so we get out of town a little bit, and that's kind of good. But this is one I wanted to mention here. When I did the consulting for AT&T, I asked if I could go visit the site where cosmic background radiation, evidence for the Big Bang, was found. And that's where it was. This was the antenna where that was found. And it was kind of neat to be able to climb up into it and see it. It was a very interesting time. Since retirement, and I'm just not going to say much about it except to say all of this here is because of John Lehman. I mentioned John, and I think he may be watching today. He's in consulting now back in Massachusetts. But a lot of these things we worked on together. He was a fantastic, excellent PhD student. And the other group of things here are things that have to do with exposure of either humans or exposures of marine species or exposures of getting involved in a number of controversies with respect to whether or not electromagnetic fields are or are not an issue with respect to the behavior and longevity of either humans or or honeybees or marine species. This one was kind of interesting because it is funded out of the UK, and the first meeting we had was in London, and we had the meeting at the Royal Institution, which is where Michael Faraday worked. And downstairs, which I went to, was a museum of Michael Faraday stuff, and it was kind of a really fun thing to do. I also established a relationship for a while before COVID. It hasn't come back since COVID, but lecturing at Tsinghua University in Beijing. This is me on one of those bicycles that are ubiquitous in Beijing. If you've ever been there, you know that there's these yellow bicycles that used to be all around, which you can use for very, very small amount of money. Completed the second edition of my book. And this one, I decided to give it away for free because I think, you know, often you write a book and you have a publisher and they want to charge some incredible amount for it, and so nobody buys it. So what's the point? No, so I give it away for free, but if you want to, you can go to Amazon and find it. Now, one of the people listening today is George Mount. How many of you remember? Some of you know George Mount. That's George. I got interested in this a long time ago and kind of wanted to get to this point. I saw this map of railroads in the Northwest in 1916, which is the time when there were more railroads in the United States than any time in history. And I noticed that there were more over here than anywhere, and I couldn't figure out why. That didn't make any sense to me. Why? You know, nobody lives here, so why are there so many railroads? And so I just started reading everything I could on it, and actually have in the past given talks on it. But we also went and explored many of them. George and I owned this thing called a speeder here, and you can go legally on these railroads with a group called, it's going to sound terrible, NARCOA. It's not, has nothing to do with narcotics. It's the North America Rail Car Owners Association. So that's one of the things that George was a very good friend of mine, very close. I knew him from the time I was in graduate school. And the last thing I'll just mention is I've now kind of morphed in the last year, serve on the board of the Union Gospel Mission. And you may have heard in the news about the fact that they now have a shelter, homeless shelter in Lewiston, because they've had a real problem down there with homeless people and no place to go. And now there are 96 beds. It was opened, completed in 2026, opened about a month later, and now is serving many of the people down there in the LC Valley. And we're very pleased to be able to be involved in that. Well, now, finish up just about the right time here. As I gradually fade into the sunset, I have teaching and research. Well, I'm gradually fading, so I'm not completely fading, but John Lehman, who is this outstanding PhD student, now doing consulting, he and I are still working together, but I leave my research to him because he's going to do a great job with that. I'm going to leave my teaching to Carl, who's back here, my son. He is in civil engineering, but, well, that's okay. And he's, in both of them, I'm saying, will do a much better job than me, all right? And isn't that great? That's what you like to see at the end of your career. you like to see, be able to hand off what you're doing to people who are going to do a better job than you did. And when you have that, that's just very, very fulfilling. So this is the end of my talk. So thank you very much for whoever decided that it was to be given to me. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It has been a wonderful career that I've had here, that I'm continuing. And WSU has been a big part of my life. So thank you. I think, if I remember right, that are there supposed to be questions? Yes. Or something? If there are, and if not, there's more food here. So just remember that if you, yes, Rob.
When you were talking about your PhD, you found that phenomenon that hadn't been observed before.
Yes.
What are the implications of it?
What are the implications? What are the implications? Yeah. What are the implications of that propagation mode I discovered didn't exist? Turns out there are some implications. It's not huge, to be perfectly honest. But basically, if you want to understand the interactions between wires above the Earth, like power lines, for example, at certain frequencies, if you don't include this term, you will get crazy answers that don't have any meaning. But it basically made a connection between something that we knew about called the Zenik wave before, but that was always done in 2 dimensions, not in 3 dimensions. And it helped us to form the complete understanding of what was going on in terms of those interactions. So in terms of practical interactions, there's some things where, for example, if you use these as geophysical probes, if you don't have it, you won't get correct answers. Be an example.
I have 2 questions. The first is, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's on.
Oh, it's already on.
I think it's,
No,
isn't it?
no, it is. No, here it is.
Oh.
There's some electromagnetic waves.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, all right, maybe right here.
Yeah.
Brooklyn Dodgers. What were they? What were they named after? Why did they have the name the Dodgers?
They had the name the Dodgers because there were a lot of
Trolley cars?
a lot of trolley cars, and in order to get to the stadium, you had to dodge them in order to get to the stadium. Is that right?
Absolutely.
That's right. Okay,
you
good.
nailed it.
Thank you.
Okay. What advice would you give to a new faculty member incoming?
I'd say the best advice is to find people who can help you get the kind of connections that I got when I was in. I wouldn't recommend necessarily you teach as broadly as I did, even though I think I look back on it and it was very good. But I would say there are people that can kind of help you get mentor and get started, and take that seriously. That's good. It is an incredible career. I have no regrets about my career here at WSU. I have no regrets about it. It's been a wonderful time. I've been able to work on problems that just because I wanted to sometimes, right? And that was very, 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 very good. But also do things that are helpful to people. I could go into the details, but I won't at this point. But I would say, my main thing I would say is find a good mentor. Yeah.
Thank you. Bob, what's the current state of knowledge about the effects of electric and magnetic fields on humans?
Yes, okay, sure. First of all, on humans, there are standards for exposure to humans. They are based on the assumption that the primary effect that electromagnetic waves, when they interact with humans, primary effect is what's called thermal effect. I, for one, happen to believe that that is an appropriate way to approach the problem. However, when you look at the controversy, and I need to mention the controversy because people talk about, for example, I did some work on 5G small cells, and there are people who say there's something fundamentally different. There are something called non-thermal effects. And what has happened is that there have been certain papers that have come out and said, yes, we found this non-thermal effect. But my approach to that, and the approach that people who, I know many of the people who've served on these committees, both the committee in European committee, which is what's called ICNIRP, as a European committee that does this, as well as the IEEE committee in the United States. They have made that assumption, but they've not included these other things, in part because I think these days just simply to have a paper published is not enough. I think it's important that that work be replicated. And this is something that's becoming more important, I think, in the scientific community as time goes on, that yes, papers can get through peer review, and I've done peer review for hundreds and hundreds of papers, and I frankly sometimes let things through that shouldn't have gone through, right? And that happens, right? But I think that when you have things like this, papers like that say there are these non-thermal effects that we have to consider, they need to be replicated before they're being taken terribly seriously. They're not taken seriously now by the committees. I think that's appropriate, but I think on the other hand, the way that you approach that is to say, let's make sure that when we have something like this, we replicate it with good science and we find out whether it's true or not. Does that help? Okay. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
I want to ask you about the future, and I know you're not going to be retired very well. You're going to continue to think. AI is changing everything. How is it going to change electrical engineering? How is it going to change the teaching of science and engineering in American universities and all universities? In just thinking, no one knows the answer to that question. Yeah. I don't want to be totally
Nobody knows,
unfair, but
there's a person in this room who knows more about it than I do, a lot more about it. He's right up here, John Schneider, who I still work with a little bit. And in fact, he just retired. He's going to be joining our group. But I'd love to have him come and talk to the emeritus group about that particular
that'd be great.
thing. I will just simply say that it has already affected the way things are done in coding. One of my sons, for example, works in IT in Seattle, and he tells me now, he said, I've done a lot of coding and that sort of thing. Now, AI does my coding for me and I check it. That's what he says. That's exactly what's happening. It has the potential for being very important. And it is, I know some places, in fact, John and I have talked about this, about how, the curriculum in some ways is going to have to change. And I'm not sure I'm the right one to do it, but it is going to be a big thing. Is that a fair statement? Yes. Yeah.
You mentioned one point in your graduate student career where you wanted to quit and
Yes.
kept going. I was curious if there was any other moments like that in your career, and if so, what made you keep going?
Lots of them. I can say, especially even in undergraduate school, I remember I did 145 credits in 4 years. I had one semester when I had 21 credits of engineering courses. I had no time to breathe. And I sometimes I would just envision myself driving a truck on the highway because it sounded a whole lot better than what I was doing. Right? But I just somehow kept going because I wanted, there was something deep that I think happened back in the 1950s when I talked about that. You had these things, Sputnik was there, the International Geophysical Year. Science was interesting. And I think what kept me going was and this is something that sounds strange, and I hope it doesn't sound too strange, but at the end of every semester, I would just sit there and I would breathe for the first time. And I would get there and I would look at what I knew that I didn't know before. And it actually was very, very positive thing for me, just to know that I was learning things. And there were things that I knew now that I had no clue what they were before that semester started. And that's important, but this is important. When I talked about the team mentoring program for underrepresented students, I was very concerned that they were being told, this engineering is too hard. You don't want to continue in engineering. You do something easy, right? And that's tempting. It's very, very tempting when you're working hard. And that's one of the reasons we did this, was to provide them with mentors who would be there and say, I'm your friend, I've done this, I'm ahead of you, and you can do it. And so I think having people around like that, faculty who will tell you that, other students who will tell you that, is a very positive thing. Yes? Oh.
What happened to your shack?
What happened to my shack? I am, right here. Yeah. I am still licensed as an amateur.
I'm asking for Kilo 2 Papa Kilo up there.
Oh. Oh, yes, that's my brother-in-law. Okay. Jim, hi, Jim. I don't know if you can see me. Yes, you can. Okay. That's my brother-in-law. He and I are both amateur radio operators. He married my sister, who passed on a little while ago. Other people here, I just mentioned George Mount. I mentioned him. He's here. John Lehman is the one who was my PhD student. He's back in Virginia right now, or in Maryland, right, or Massachusetts, I should say. David Chang was here. I don't know where he is. Eric is one of my sons. This is a niece that I have here. Mani is from the Essex Center and is doing this online. So the number of people that I talked about today who are actually online looking at this now. But my shack, I still have one, but I'm not very active. Thank you.
Is there anybody from Zoom who has a question or comment?
I guess not.
Charlie, where did Charlie go? I'm in the back. Oh, there you are. Oh, I can hardly see you. Can you come to the front? Thank you, Charlie. We need to make this presentation.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, well, this plaque says Emeritus Society Legacy of Excellence Award 2025 through 2026, presented to Dr. Robert G. Olsen in recognition of his continuing contributions to academia, Washington State University, and to the community.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Okay. Yeah. And I have, in order to keep this, I have to keep coming to the Emeritus Society, is that right?
That's right.
That's right.
And make the contributions to the...
Okay. Thank you very much.
We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And thanks for everybody for coming. We got a great crowd and really appreciate it. Should have expected that. And I still think we have some more food. So if you don't eat it, the undergrads are going to get it. So get it.